Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather, and I have been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009, the original Tudor History Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about a Tudor princess who doesn't really get a lot of love and a lot of attention, and that is Margaret Douglas. I think probably it's just me, but when I think about Margaret Douglas, I always think about her when she was older and scheming to marry different people, like her son off to different people. And I just think about her in that later phase of her life. But I don't really ever think about her when she was a young, glamorous Tudor princess who really seemed to have her uncle, Henry VIII, wrapped around her little finger. He had definitely had a soft spot for her. So we are going to talk about Margaret Douglas, especially when she was a young princess. If you would like to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you never miss a video that I put out. So let's get right into it. Margaret Douglas was born in October 8th, 1515, into a world of political chaos. Her mother, Margaret Tudor, was the sister of Henry VIII and the widow of King James IV of Scotland. So James IV died at the Battle of Flodden, and that made Margaret a widow. Margaret made a very controversial decision. She married, quite quickly, Archibald Douglas, a powerful but contentious Scottish noble. Their union was far from happy. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of mistrust, and unfortunately, their daughter, young Margaret, bore the brunt of it. Her early years were shaped by this volatile relationship of her parents. As Margaret Tudor tried to escape the hostile Scottish factions and return to England, she was trying to bring her daughter with her. But then Archibald, determined to retain control over Margaret, resorted to what would be called a medieval grab-and-run tactic. He physically took Margaret from her mother and fled with her deeper into Scotland. Without any kind of formal custody arrangements in those days, his act effectively sealed Margaret's fate, keeping her in Scotland under her father's care. But then Archibald's military failures left Margaret in the hands of her godfather, Cardinal Wolsey. Everything's related and tied together, isn't it? So Cardinal Wolsey becomes her guardian, and then he, of course, had his eventual fall from grace, which added another layer of instability to her chaotic childhood. By age 15, her life took on a new turn. Recognizing her as a potential and valuable political pawn, Henry VIII summoned his niece to his court. He was increasingly anxious about his lack of heirs, and Margaret, being the third in line for the throne, was now a vital part of his dynastic plans. Margaret's arrival in the English court was marked by warmth and favor from her uncle, who saw in her not just a relative, a niece, but also a potential successor. She was placed in the household of her cousin, Princess Mary. The two girls were close in age, and they formed a quick and strong and lifelong bond with each other. As Margaret settled into life at the English court, she experienced the thrill and peril of first love. Around 1535, she fell in love with Thomas Howard, a young and ambitious nobleman 4 years her senior. Now, this is not the same Thomas Howard who's the Duke of Norfolk, who is Anne Boleyn's uncle. This is another Thomas Howard who was the half-brother to that Thomas Howard. He was part of the powerful Howard family, closely connected to Anne Boleyn, of course, also her uncle, who was then Queen of England. Margaret and Thomas's romance was anything but ordinary. Despite her status as a potential heir to the throne, Margaret pursued a secret engagement with Thomas. This was pretty much something she should not have been doing. In the Tudor court, royal marriages were political decisions tightly controlled by the king. Engaging in a romantic entanglement without Henry's approval was not only forbidden, but could be considered treasonous, especially for someone as close to the throne as Margaret. Yet the couple seemed genuinely in love, willing to risk everything to be together. So very romantic. But their timing could not have been worse. Anne Boleyn's position at court was rapidly deteriorating, and when she fell out of favor, the Howards' influence crumbled with her. In 1536, Anne was arrested and eventually executed for her alleged treason. and this cast suspicion on her entire family, including Thomas Howard. Soon after, word of Margaret and Thomas's engagement reached Henry, who was enraged by the unauthorized union. He saw it as a direct challenge to his authority and a very dangerous power play. Both Margaret and Thomas were arrested and sent to the Tower of London, accused of plotting to advance their claim to the throne. Imprisoned within the walls of the tower, Margaret's circumstances grew bleak. Thomas was formally charged with planning to marry a royal heir without the king's consent, an act that was considered treasonous. Margaret was not charged formally, but she remained in prison alongside him. Their love story took a tragic turn when Thomas fell seriously ill and died at the Tower in 1537. Margaret was left devastated and also gravely ill. Her health deteriorated so rapidly that her mother, Margaret Tudor, wrote to Henry begging for her daughter's release. Perhaps softened by Thomas's death and Margaret's precarious health, Henry allowed her to leave the Tower. She was sent to a nunnery to recover, far from the court and its dangers. After recovering from her illness, Margaret returned to court and quickly established herself as a prominent figure. Despite her earlier setbacks, Henry VIII welcomed her back, recognizing again her political value. Margaret was appointed as a lady-in-waiting to later queens, including Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and finally Catherine Parr. So then Margaret is back at court. She served Anne of Cleves, and she's now serving Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife, is a relative of Thomas Howard, Margaret's lost love. And perhaps then it is no surprise that Margaret fell for another Howard, Sir Charles Howard, who was actually Catherine Howard's brother. Despite her past heartbreak, Catherine, she seemed to have an Achilles heel when it came to those Howard boys. So Sir Charles, like his relatives, was well connected at court. Like I said, he was Catherine Howard's brother. And Margaret found herself at this point in yet another forbidden romance. Once again, Henry was not amused. Marriages or even courtships among royals were tightly controlled, as we said, and this latest romantic rebellion, after she'd already been warned once, was taken as a direct affront to his authority. Margaret was actually sent to Sion Abbey, but then she was moved to the Tower of London again when Catherine Howard was sent to Sion Abbey before she was executed. At this point, Margaret's father, Archibald Douglas, stepped in, and he had gained power in Scotland during this time. He was able to leverage some influence, and Henry wanted an alliance with Scotland. This is the period where then we're going to see the rough wooing, where Henry is trying to marry his son Edward to marry Queen of Scots. There's a desire for a relationship with Scotland. So Henry relents and brings Margaret back to court. She's now lady-in-waiting to Catherine Parr. And Margaret's days of romantic misadventures are coming to a close. In true Tudor fashion, Henry married her off for strategic reasons, this time to Matthew Stuart, the Earl of Lennox, who had aspirations for the Scottish throne. Matthew was willing to switch allegiances and offer his troops to Henry in exchange for marrying Margaret. At age 29, Margaret was probably quite relieved to finally have a sanctioned legal marriage that Henry was happy with, and her position was able to be stabilized. The couple was united by ambition rather necessarily than romance, and they became a Tudor power couple. They were married in a ceremony attended by Henry and Catherine Parr, a royal wedding, if you will. Margaret wasted no time in pursuing her ambitions through her new marriage. In 1545, she gave birth to a son, Henry Stuart, whom history would remember as Lord Darnley. Margaret's focus now shifted on securing power through her son, whose royal lineage was making him a player in the Tudor succession. She and Matthew became deeply involved in plots to secure Darnley's position as the future king, setting the stage for a new chapter of Margaret's story, which will be a different video. All right, if you have made it to this point in the video and you enjoyed it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. It helps to feed the YouTube algorithm and serve our content up to more people. Also, I hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out content like this on the regular. If you want to keep watching Tudor videos, why not check out this video on Margaret Douglas's life, her whole life, or here's a video that YouTube thinks you will enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I share the planet with you, and don't forget to drink your water. All right, I will talk with you again soon. Bye-bye.